I am so excited to have you because you have a lot of layers for me. Is not only do you have the intuitive piece, you're a mother and you're a psychologist, which this a clinical psychologist. And this is really important to me for about a million zillion different reasons because like you have the grounding and the space and the science and in this intuitive space. And you've seen clients, you have children, and you know, being honest, to get a psychologist while being highly intuitive as a client has been it hasn't been so much of a process for me, but it has been a process pertaining to children. When you come really clean about your intuitive abilities, you can tell real quick in the eyes who is even I just need you to be open to it as a practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
So this is this I'm excited for in this podcast. But where I am going to start is your story and how you became awakened to your own intuitive abilities and like your childhood a little bit and how you got there. So
Mm-hmm.
would you fill us in?
Absolutely. So, really, for me, everything started when I was 18 years old and I lost my aunt. My aunt had juvenile onset diabetes. She was sick on and off throughout her life, obviously, struggling with that. But when I was 18 years old, we my cousin's always, every time, her son, he's always like, was she 48 or 49 or 47? But I think it was 48. It was around there, 47, 48, 49. And she was waiting for a kidney and pancreas transplant. And in order to get the transplant, you need to make sure that all the rest of your organs are strong enough, that your body's strong enough to withstand the transplant. And when they were doing like a lot of the pre-op procedures, they realized that she had had several heart attacks that no one ever knew about. And so in order for her to get the transplant, or to be moved up the list, they needed to go in and repair her heart. And when they did that, they couldn't. She ended up dying on the table. They couldn't bring her heart back. It was just too damaged from the diabetes and from the heart attacks that there was nothing they could do. And I come from a family of physicians. So my grandfather was a pediatrician, my uncle's an orthopedic surgeon, so very science-minded people. And this experience was crushing to me for a number of reasons. One, she was like a second mother to me. My family's extremely close. She had gone through a divorce and basically lived at our house for the years, the really formative years for me, from like 13 till I left for college. And she was a huge part of my life. And because I was at college at the time, I came home, I think it was for 2 or 3 days. We're Jewish, so we went to the Shiva. I had the Shiva. And then I went right back to school and kind of got into my life. And this was the first significant death. I had lost great grandparents before, but nothing that seemed so out of order and so earth shattering at the time. I mean, my cousin lost his mother, my mom lost her sister, my grandparents lost their child. It was all of those pieces. And I went right back to school and kind of got on with my life, but really struggled with her death and what it meant. And I started going to therapy when I had come home that summer and was exploring grief and loss and my feelings around it. And I had a lot of anxiety that I now look back and can really attribute to her death. And then after college, I got a job. I was selling radio airtime, which I was miserable with. It was not what I was meant to do, clearly. And part of my struggle in terms of understanding her journey was that she had become a stay-at-home mother and really given up any career. And I never wanted, and then ended up in a divorce, and I never wanted to be in that position where I felt like I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. And that was really what it was for her. And whether or not this was true or I made these connections, right? Because we always tell ourselves stories about what certain things are. In my mind, the reason that she ended up how she did was because she relied so much on her husband and they ended up getting a divorce. And then she had to go back to work at a job that was not what I think she was trained as a teacher, but this was not what she was trained to do. The conditions there were not ideal for her illness and the stress and that piece, and then um her body starting to shut down, like all of that sort of led to her demise. So that was not going to be me. And I had built this story around, well, if I let that happen, I'm going to end up the same way she did. And so I really pushed myself and made a point, like I was going to have this high powered career. I wasn't going to let that, I was going to be this strong, independent woman, and was anxiety ridden as a result, because it was so much. I was driving so much and so hard, and I hated this job. I ended up quitting the job, waiting tables. I had a degree from the University of Michigan, so there was a lot of like ego in that, and how do I wait tables if I graduated from Michigan, and ended up waiting tables and really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, which was go to school for psychology. And shortly before my cousin got married, I had this now what I refer to as a visit. I was in grad school at the time. I was a first or second year grad student, where my aunt came to me, and I saw very clearly was the first image I saw was my mom standing in front of our kitchen, looking out the window, loading the dishwasher. And my aunt said to me, "Tell her she doesn't have to be sad. I'm going to be at the wedding." And then I saw another image, and it was of my uncle, and he was outside running. Like he was like on a running path. And she said, "And tell Uncle Richie I hear him when he talks to me when he's running." So I woke up from this, and I looked at my husband and I said, I think that Aunt Linda was just here. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I feel like she was just here. Like she was sitting at the edge of my bed, and I was having this conversation with her. It was as real as you and I are sitting here today." And I picked up the phone. I called my mom, told her what happened. And she said to me, excuse me, "I was standing at the kitchen sink last night saying to Linda, I can't believe you're not going to be at this wedding. I really wish you could be here." And then I called my uncle and I said the same thing. And he said, "Well, when I'm outside running, that's my time when I talk to her." And so this started me, and it wasn't like a bullet shot to this is what I'm going to do. It really was a journey, frankly, over 20 years, where I would explore. I had a professor who really encouraged me when I told her what happened. She was very grounded in psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is kind of the tradition that came out of Freud, like the kind of next generation. And she said, "I think you are onto something here. I think you need to pursue this." And I didn't at the time. And then when my grandfather died, it happened again. And then it started happening with patients, where I started experiencing their loved ones coming to me. And that's when I decided I needed to sort of understand a little bit more what this was all about for me.
When you saw it with patients, like I was interested how the validation, did you come forward and say, I saw this and this and this, or you're sitting in session and they're sharing and your images of what was going on was validated because they began to speak about it? Is that?
No, it was more like it was more just that intuitive knowing. I never brought it into session because frankly that wasn't really why they were coming to me. And I
Yeah.
have brought other things into sessions in more subtle ways, but this felt it was still so delineated at the time that I
Yeah.
wasn't really sure what to do with it. And so I just held it. But other than saying I just knew it was for them because of the way it came to me and the messages, I didn't ever validate it because I didn't feel like I could. I did do for a couple of years much later after I had explored all of this, and I was having a lot of sort of intrusion happening to me where things in my house were kind of going a little berserko, and I didn't want that. And so I worked with a woman for 2 years, a medium, who helped me understand how to set boundaries and learn how you can control how you communicate and how you open up and when you want to be open. And so I did that, and I did what I called my spiritual internship, where I interviewed where I did readings for people for a couple of months just to see. I said I would do it for a month. It ended up being 3 months because I had that many people who just wanted to have the experience. I did it for free. I just had come in, let me sit with you. let me see what information comes to me. And that was really where I was able to validate a lot of these experiences.
I actually have a question about the woman who came in to help show you uh, when things go berserker in your house and how to create that space and that barriers. I think there's this fabulous misconception that I see in parents' forums and stuff like this pertaining to highly intuitive children that if they do a protection bubble or put a crystal under the bed, the next day it's going to be over. That that the energy flowing into your house or flowing in is just going to stop. Like you can put the barrier up. And I'm happy to hear for you that it took 2 years of you learning with her to understand that. Would you speak a bit more on things occurring in your house and then how, um, maybe like how the process of that went?
Yeah, so as I started to open up more, obviously I started to get more information coming, and it was lights flickering on and off, and the point that really pushed me over the edge was there was it was almost like a power surge in my house where the lights were going on and off and on and off like the entire house. And I called a friend who lives across the street and I said, "Are you having any power issues right now?" And she said, "No, not at all." And I thought, okay, this can't happen. I have kids. I have a life. I can't be bombarded. And so I think of it not dissimilar to how you should be setting boundaries in your regular life, right? Most
Yes.
people aren't great at boundaries in their regular life, but that it's not okay for for anyone to invade my space unless I welcome them in. And that doesn't mean that we still don't have toxic people in our lives trying to kind of creep in and push those boundaries, but it's our job to say, you know what, now is not a good time. I'm not okay with this. And I also am it's really, really important and for me that we are here in a physical body now. And there's a reason that we chose to be in a physical body now. We are not meant to be disembodied entities if we chose to be if we chose to be embodied.
Yeah.
And so frankly, I don't want to be connected to that all the time. I don't feel like it's helpful. I feel like it takes me away from living in the here and now. And this is our lessons. Our work is to be here on earth and to feel what it is like to be in a human body, which can be really uncomfortable and
Yes.
feelings can be really intense. But connecting to spirit all the time is not, I don't think, is not a healthy way to be because again, we chose to be embodied.
Yeah. No, I 1000% agree with this. The other thing too is where it might vary a bit different for you and I is somebody had depicted to me that there are like two different types of bodies or people, as in us who meditate and then try to awaken and open up, right? So we're opening up so the energy can flow in. And then there, for me with my son, is he came into the world and he was just all open up and the energy just flowing in. And so what we're trying to do is create the valves to, or the filters to moderate that because it's just overwhelming. And
Right.
yeah, and so people when they get awakened, they get a taste of it, but then there's people who that's like their life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's actually research right now happening at Yale. I'm interviewing them in a couple of weeks, and
Ooh.
there is a psychiatrist, and the woman who's running his lab is a medium. And she's someone who, similar to your son, has had these experiences, which was not my experience.
Yeah.
I had what I say is a spiritually transformative experience that opened me up. Right. I think I was a pretty intuitive kid, but when I say intuitive, I don't mean connecting to spirits. I mean more like empathic,
Yeah.
where I could really sense and experience others' emotions, which is a whole different topic in terms of how we manage that, because I don't think it's dissimilar, right? We still have to
Yeah.
set boundaries. We still have to be really clear because we cannot be containers for everybody else's feelings and experiences and emotions because that's not healthy either.
No.
So they're doing research to figure out how some people are able to shut it off and what they're able to do that versus others who it turns into a real psychosis, right? And it
Yes.
becomes a very disturbing experience.
Yeah, just like being bombarded with trauma constantly, it's going to turn into a psychosis of
Mm-hmm.
sorts. And here, that's why we took the drastic measures of our own life so it didn't get to that degree, because there was no um because the help is so limited. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I would think we saw like 12 therapists, and like it was like this. I have no This is so rare and beyond me. I'm sorry. Like
Mm.
that was just it's beyond me. I'm sorry. It's beyond me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry. Um
Right. And it really, I mean, one of the things when I was talking to the psychiatrist that I was so excited about was how this is really going to change the way we look at some of these diagnoses
right? Just
and how we treat them. Like, if you can really treat it from a place of, okay, how can you really use this in your life, right? How can you use, and I think it's the same with anything, even if you're anxious, how do you use that anxiety to help you
yeah.
rather than hinder you? And so if there are kids like your son who are having these really intense experiences that are powerful. I mean, we know how powerful it can be for the other side, for our guides to be able to help us and guide us and to tap into that. It just can't be the only thing, right? So it has to be moderated, like everything.
Mhm.
So you can take it in, so you can digest it, so you can make sense of it, and then you can use that to move forward in your earthly life.
Right. Yeah. And to see, I mean, you're in psychology, so like patterns are a huge, 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 huge thing. And it's no different with like intuitive ability. I don't know if you felt like it took me a while to understand like the patterns in which it comes and flows in, and um what energy comes in and how it feels, and then what do I do? But then it ends up watching that you end up watching your children, and you'd be like, oh, okay, he does this when this is occurring.
Mm.
And I mean, patterns, and then it goes into generational, like
Right. Right. Which is a whole nother level. But I think when people think about connecting, oftentimes they think it's this like huge event all the time. And it's
yes.
not. It's really, really subtle. I mean, if you had a near death experience or an experience like I had, or, there's lots of different spiritually transformative experiences that people have, but it is not always like when I connect now, it's so subtle that if I'm not paying attention, I'm going to miss it.
Yeah.
And I think that and part of that is it's not natural for me, right? Like this is something I've worked to develop, so it's not like I don't feel like I'm someone that was born like your
Yeah.
son,
Yeah.
where it's just all kind of flooding in. I feel much more like I had this experience. I've cultivated this experience over time. I still have to cultivate this experience. And if I don't, I notice.
Yep. This interests me because you had written a post and then you had read it on your podcast about being a PTA mom, and then like walking into that awakening, and then how do I share this or don't share this? And then I oh, I realized, well, in that specific space, like I'm not. And I'd love to let's talk about you being a mother. When
Mm-hmm.
you this awakening started to happen for you, like were your kids did you have kids yet?
Yeah. So I didn't have kids when this started, which was, let's see, probably 2003-ish,
Right.
2004. My daughter's 14, so she was born in 2006. And I have to say, when my kids were young, I did not this was not sort of front of mind for me in any way.
Yeah.
It was once my middle one, who's now 12, it was sort of in between my middle and my third, my last, that I had some time. There's 4.5 years between them, where I had some time to start exploring a little bit more. And then when my little guy was born, and then right after, that's when I really started even more kind of journeying and looking in. So it has ebbed and flowed a bit with just the nature of my life. And again, I say, like, I'm not someone who this is natural for
Right.
for, some of the mediums out there. It's just more really something I've wanted to develop and I've been really curious about. And the podcast came because I didn't want to practice mediumship, but I wanted to do something with it. And I
Yeah.
wanted to explore, and I wanted to open people up, and I wanted to educate people, because I felt like there were a lot of people who were having experiences like this, but didn't know what to do with them or didn't know how to make sense of them. And I've had people come into my practice as well, similar to you, who are looking for a therapist who can integrate those two pieces. And it's hard to find. And it's hard to find people who are willing to talk about that, because this was my experience. I didn't want to lose my referral base. My referral base is physicians. I didn't want physicians not referring to me anymore, because who is this woman who thinks she can
Yeah.
talk to the dead?
Oh, I totally get that. Um, what is super interesting to me though is now having found some practitioners and physicians, or not physicians, practitioners, they are like secretly buddied up with hospital physicians and stuff who will send them people, um, who will be like, there's something off about this. You should see this,
Mm-hmm.
this practitioner.
Yeah.
And it is, and with the psychologist that I had met, when I would sit there and they'd be like, I do believe in this and I am seeing this coming into my practice, but I don't know what to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So that's
Mm-hmm.
what I've even been contacted a lot with the podcast with other practitioners pertaining to that. Like they're listening. Like that's why it was important for me to talk to you. They
Mm-hmm.
are listening, and it's like I need the steps and to see what other people are doing, because um I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and I really don't think of it, and maybe this is not right, but I don't think of it as that dissimilar from other experiences we have in a body.
No.
I try to just think of it as, okay, this is just an energy that is not in a body, but is still an energy. Our way of delivering ourselves is this capsule of our body. Theirs is not. So what do you do? How do you set a boundary? How do you tell someone, you know what, this isn't a good time? How do you um, deal with your child when they're overstimulated?
Yeah.
Right? What do you do about that? Well, what do you do if they're overstimulated in the world normally? Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's apply that to this and see what happens. I mean, I haven't worked with kids in quite some time, but that would be what I would do.
That's even difficult in its own right, right? There's very like the amount of psychologists for children is very small. And I don't know where you stand on this, but I'm a big believer is like it really starts with the parents. A lot of times they so desperately want to find a psychologist for their child, and like really at the base brunt of it is like starts with you first. You go, and then you'll see things change.
Well, and that's part of the reason that I stopped treating kids, was because it was like, here's my kid, you need to make it better. And it's like, no, 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 no. We need to work together to figure out how to help your child. And you showing up in my office 1 hour a week, dropping your kid off and coming back an hour later is not what's going to transform this. Now, there are times in kids' lives where it might be if they've experienced loss, or I even think sort of acute anxiety and phobias can be really, really useful with, you know, individual therapy with just the child and the therapist. But in many, many cases, it is a lot of our own stuff that gets projected onto our children, our own unresolved issues, our own beliefs about who we want them to be, who we think they should be, that literally just gets vomited onto them because we haven't done our own work to really look inside about, okay, what does it mean to me to have a kid who is X, Y, and Z?
Yeah. Like massive. Like really that's where it starts. I don't care if you consider yourself intuitive or not, because everybody has their own feeling on it. Like literally at the base level of changing everything in your family, that's where it starts.
Well, and I say, I don't know how, I don't really, it's great if you were intuitive, but
Yeah.
you cannot be spiritual without being psychological. So if you have not looked at yourself, if you have not done your
Yes.
work, and I mean, I talk very openly. I was in therapy for 17 years. I continue to work with a coach. It's shifted a little because now I do integrate more spirituality, and my therapist was a trained analyst. So for people who don't know what that means, she went to school for psychology and then spent years doing psychoanalytic training where she was on the couch 5 days a week. It's really the way that Freud kind of prescribed practicing was, 5 days a week on the couch, sort of the typical stereotype of you laying on the couch, the therapist sitting behind you. That wasn't what I did, but that was her training. So, I mean, we're talking about really, really grounded in psychological theory. And I did a lot of work, and I went every day for 17 years. I think I took a break when I had my daughter. And then when she retired, I was shifting into doing more energetic work. And so it seemed like a natural progression. But to think that you can be spiritual without having really looked inside and understand yourself, I think is not, I think the definition of spirituality is the ability to look inside and know yourself.
Yes. I can't agree with that more. It's so true. You cannot.
Mm-mm.
All right, I'm going back to your kids.
Okay.
So, and you and like motherhood. So as this is awakening for you, do you see, I mean, I guess this would be a twofold question. Do you see anything different happen with your kids? And also too, like, how do you like, this is how I struggled a bit. I don't know if it's like struggle, but I think everybody experiences this. When you start to awaken and do those things, walking back into regular life and um, discussing the rat race questions, and it kind of like it's almost like your mouth isn't able to do it anymore, at least for me, or people fall away, or like how did you function in the PTA world and that school system world with your own
Because
kids?
it feels sort of not important.
It
Is
feels
that
not
what you're
important, but certain things you ever just feel like it's not true.
more that it doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
it
Yeah.
does matter. In some ways it really does because it's the
Right.
journey of life. And I think that that's what's given my podcast. And frankly, when I told people, it wasn't that they thought, oh, this can't be. It was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Her? She, if she's had these experiences, then maybe I need to give it a second thought, because
Yeah.
I'm super involved in my community. I serve on 2 school boards. I'm really active. I have a very strong voice about what I think is right and what I think is wrong. And so I've spent a lot of time kind of cultivating, um what's the word I want to use? Like cultivating a leadership role in my community. And in some ways, I think that's given all of this credibility, is that it gives people another opportunity. It gives people a chance to say, huh, maybe there's more to this.
Yeah.
And so I mean, sometimes I feel like, does this matter, all of this? And the answer is probably no, it doesn't. But I also feel like it's my way of, it's part of my spiritual journey, because it's
Yeah.
my way of giving back to the world, and it's my way of contributing to my community. And that's really important. And how you do that is an expression of your soul. And everybody gets to choose how they do that. You know, it might be that you volunteer at a homeless shelter, or you do, you know, you do food drives or whatever it is. It can look different for everybody, but I see it as an expression of my soul.
Yeah. Well, and just generally your presence in that, right? You being present in a community role, in you know, a school board, or people are naturally going to know things about you and what you're doing, and but also see like your work and how you speak, even if it's not about this topic whatsoever.
Mhm.
And that alone makes them curious, you know? And okay, I don't know, has this happened to you? Like, sometimes I thought people weren't watching, but then I go out in like a social setting, family party, um, a park day with a bunch of people or whatever, and it like the people just like walk up quietly behind you and they're like, I listened to your podcast, or I saw your post. I've been watching. I
Yeah,
totally
I
get this.
actually had this experience because when I released the podcast, I sent it out to my friends and family, right? And I had sort of forgotten that my husband's coworkers' wives were part of these emails. And my husband he's a lawyer, but he works in finance. So you can only imagine, right? It's like this email goes out right before holiday party, because my podcast launched in December of 2018. And I'm super excited to put this out to the world. And my husband starts getting emails. Wait, what? Your wife talks to dead people? And it was like this crazy, like, I want to shrink back into a hole. And can I swear on this podcast?
Absolutely, yes.
And like, fuck it. Fuck it. I don't give a shit anymore. This is who I am, and I'm stepping into it. And so it was, that to me was actually almost scarier than the PTA stuff, because I felt like the PTA people knew me, right? The moms on the playground knew me. I had built up the equity with them. But my husband's coworkers, they knew me, but I never really revealed this part of myself. Friends on the playground sort of would know bits and pieces, or I would tell stories. But this was really the part that it was so scary for me to open myself up and for them to see me like that. And I have to say that some of them still listen to the podcast and are fascinated by it. And
Uh-huh.
so I feel like, okay, well, I was able to open up more people in that way.
Have in that time when you released that too, were you like pretty forthcoming with your husband with everything that had been going on with you? Because
Yeah, he knew everything from the beginning. And I actually took him with me a couple times to see some large group mediumship readings, because I wanted him to experience it separate from what I told him. He's never had any experience like this. This is not his world.
yeah,
I think he's a huge skeptic. I'm still a skeptic. He's a huge skeptic, and that's fine. And I think that that's what helped me, is that I finally got to the place where it didn't really matter anymore what other people thought. It didn't matter if other people believed it or didn't believe it. These experiences had happened to me so many times that I no longer could turn a blind eye to it. And
yeah,
so I just was like, okay, you don't have to accept it. This doesn't have to be your reality. This doesn't have to be your truth, but it is mine. And it was very, and I'm still open to people saying, I don't think that's possible. And I'm just like, okay, tell me
yeah.
why. Let me understand.
I think also too, having skeptical people is like important to balance, like way important to balance. Um, yeah, I'm not even remotely averse to the skeptics, but what I and you know, it's different in different areas and different people and different cultures. I've experienced, instead of skepticism, like this mass pullback and like silence. And but then those who are like very interested are like very chatty with me, or very, I need to, what do you think about this? Or, you know what I mean? There's a lot of communicating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't, And with my own husband, um, I had to do a lot of processing. Like, I feel like I gave him bits and pieces, but I think because it was so involved with our kids that I had to process first before going and like verbalizing what I was thinking, because he was so anxious about stuff, because it
Mm-hmm.
really did affect like the health and well-being of our children.
Right. Right.
And so yeah, there was it, I've always felt like I was choosing my words wisely, but not trying to filter them. It was like, I want to make sure that I am saying this to you and discussing this with you in a way that is the most truthful without like blowing up your world. Because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want him to believe I'd like gone off the rails. you know?
Right. Right.
But what else happened was he was experiencing stuff in the house. He was experiencing stuff with the kids. So I had some kind of foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that's not the case with everybody. And
Right. Right. And I understand why it's really difficult for people to share this, because they're scared of what others will think and how they might be viewed or judged, or um, what others, will say. And I completely understand that, which is part of why I've done the podcast, is to show there are lots of people having these experiences.
when you're a ferocious learner, which I've noticed, I think we're both Geminis. Like the 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 emphasis on like communicating and the needing to like learn and have knowledge and understand which side you're coming from, and um like it's embedded in there deep. And that's the exact same reason for me to have my podcast. Was I was like, okay, I'm having all these conversations with people, and I want to have these conversations, and just even listening to them, not because it's me, but the same thing with a podcast, like me listening to you is like, whoa, okay, I didn't think about thinking about it this way. Oh, they
Well,
are having those experiences. How are they navigating this? And why
mm-hmm.
did they choose that way?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think for me, so much of this is I think because I'm a psychologist, I can understand how people might be thinking about things, and so I like to try to ask those questions to clarify for people. Okay,
Yes.
how does this really relate to me in real life, and what can I do to apply whatever whomever is on the podcast is talking about to my everyday life to make changes? Because people are
Yes.
listening to my podcast, to your podcast, mostly. I mean, the reason I want to listen to a podcast is because I want to learn and grow from it. I don't want to listen to like banter about the Kardashians. No offense if anybody listens to banter. I mean, there's a place for that. I like to read a little bit about that.
Yeah.
People Magazine is sort of my guilty pleasure. But if I'm investing time to listen, I want to be listening to learn. So that's kind of the lens by which I approach my own podcast, is to give people an opportunity to learn something new from someone and be able to apply that to their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Big time. Um, I was I'm totally spacing out, and I had a really good question. It's driving me crazy.
It'll come. It'll
It'll
come.
come. It'll come. Oh, okay. With the mediumship, I'd love to know why you decided not to go down that route.
So it was a number of reasons. One, it felt like I was not quite good enough. And I felt like because this wasn't something that came naturally to me, it was something that I was really going to have to take the time to hone my skills in on. And and I think if I would have done that, could I have been better? Sure, because when you practice anything, obviously you get better at it. But it didn't feel like the work that I really enjoyed doing, because I like being in it with people. And that was sort of like a one-off, like, I'm going to do a reading for you. I know it will be meaningful. You'll take stuff away from it, but how are you going to integrate that? What are you going to do to make a difference with the information that I give you? Yes, it's really helpful to know our loved ones are on the other side and they're guiding us. but it doesn't take away if you've lost someone you love from that grief. It doesn't stop you from feeling sadness and pain and loneliness if someone who's close to you dies. It wouldn't do that for me either. So I think that, you know, am I scared of death? No. Do I want to die when it's time? I'll be okay with it, probably, but I'll still feel a little bit anxious about what's to come. I don't want anything to ever happen to my husband or my children, right? Like that's not, I'm not okay with, oh yeah, my loved ones live on. And so if they die, they die. That is not at all it. And so I felt like doing the readings wasn't really the work that I enjoy doing with people, which is being in the weeds with them and the mud with them and the slush and the slug and the yuck and helping them come out the other side. And so it was limiting for me in that way. And
Oh, no.
I feel like if people are going to see a medium, it should be someone who this is really their, like, this is their calling. This is what they are meant to do. And they do it with a whole shit ton of integrity. And they do it from an evidential mediumship place. And it is, 85 to 90%, 85 to 100% accurate, because it can be such a transformative experience, but it can also be the complete opposite. And when someone is experiencing a loss and they want to connect, it's so important to feel like you're connected and to not have it feel like it was a sham or an experience that did not validate that. And then that shuts down, I think, a tool for grieving.
Yep. I 1000% agree with that. What I the beginning part of that felt really important. You had talked to Dr. Jennifer Freed
Mm-hmm.
about, she's big into astrology. But like this point came really home to me, is you can go to a medium or have an astrology reading or something, and you can be given this information, right? And then what do you do with it?
Right.
Like, um I I hate to say this and trying to single people out, but they'll get that information, right? Like, let's just say, like, I'm a Gemini, I'm a communicator. And that's where it stops. It's just like the validation, oh, you saw me. And then, but like there's a huge part of growth from that. Like, there's a whole much deeper
Mm-hmm.
situation there. And I mean, I'm sure you see it in therapy and when you did the mediumship thing, like where people want to be seen, but like they get seen and then they don't want to go any further than that. Like,
Right. And that's why when people are like, what mediums do you go to? I've only had one or two readings in my life because, and usually it just validates what I already know about myself.
yeah,
If it didn't, I would need to take a look at that and be like, okay, what's that about? Why am I not aware of that part of myself? But again, I think this goes back to, because I was in therapy for so long, I have a pretty good sense of the good, the bad, and the ugly about me. The parts of myself, the shadow parts of myself that I want to disavow. But I no longer despise those parts of myself, right? They're just another part of myself. And so I think, yes, what do you do? And I said in my interview with Dr. Freed, like, that's actually probably astrology would have served me better in a lot of ways, because let's take what we know, let's take what we see about who the stars say you are, and let's put that into practice. Let's optimize those things about yourself.
right. How do you feel like now you've structured your life, where you integrated this intuitive side of you and maybe your practice, or maybe you didn't?
No, they're very integrated now, I think, but it's not as much, oh, a dead relative is talking to me. It's more, what does this person need in this moment right now?
Yeah.
And that's how I've kind of come to understand intuition is, okay, let me check in. I go to this woman who does, she's actually a physical therapist, but she does healing as well from a physical standpoint. And she does this body talk where she's always talking to my body, figuring out what I need. Like, does she need this? And she does this muscle testing stuff, and I don't really fully understand it. But I sort of do the same thing where it's like, okay, what does this person need now, right? And I just pay attention to that. And so now it's almost hard for me to differentiate anymore what is coming from outside of me and what is now coming from within me. And I think that that's when you're fully integrated into your soul. It no longer feels like this separate entity. And that's really what I want for people, is to be in full alignment. I always do this up and down thing because I think of like our chakras, right? When, like, if our
Yeah.
chakras are fully open and aligned, things come easy. People talk about being in flow. And I think about, like, okay, it's easy because I'm in alignment with what is highest and best for my soul.
Yeah.
And I notice very quickly when I'm not. If
Yeah.
it's overscheduled, if it's, you know, having coffee with someone that I agreed to that I didn't want to, if it's like any of those things, they could be very small, but they throw us out of alignment. And if I've booked too much in one day and I feel a little off, okay, why? Because I was out of alignment. I didn't allow enough space for me to do things that felt really nurturing and good to me. And you don't know, you can't always do that. I get that. Um, but as I've gotten older, I've tried harder to really make that a point and to really try to integrate those things into my life.
Do you feel like your ability to, um, well, maybe it's like your boundaries got stronger as the more, or your boundaries got maybe like closer to you as the stronger and more intuitive and integrating you had? Like, this is how, yeah, like the more integrated my intuitive qualities and in alignment I am with myself, my boundaries are getting like smaller and smaller, like closer to me.
Right. Firmer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
firmer.
Yeah. And again, is that age? Maybe. Right. Like, I think as we get older, we're like, yeah, I'm not going to deal with that nonsense. But I also think it's sort of all of these pieces as
Yeah.
we learn and grow and integrate and determine, certainly coming out of this COVID time, what's important, what matters, what doesn't, the fragility of life, how meaningful life can be, how beautiful life can be when it is shared with people we love and care about, how much so many people miss those experiences, those hugs, those feelings of love and warmth and connection. And ultimately, again, that's what it's about, right? Anybody who's had a near death experience, who's shared that, always talks about feeling completely enveloped in unconditional love.
Hmm.
And I think that if we can bring that into the world now, what how great is that?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be, I don't know how you feel, but especially you're coming from seeing clients and in this time, like, I'll be really interested to see the boundaries that occur for, you know, society. You know, I don't know, the rush of overwhelm became too much.
Yeah, I agree. It's like everything came opening up and flooding back so quickly. And I've been just struggling with it myself because obviously we want to see people and we want to be with people and we haven't been with people for so long. And it feels like a lot. One, because we're not used to it, right? We're used to being pretty much shut into our homes and really hunkered down with our families. Uh, but also, and I've been posing this question to my patients over the past, months, frankly, like, what is worth going back to for you? What isn't?
Yeah.
What are you going to do about that? And I'm asking myself the same questions. What is
Yeah.
worth going back to for me? What isn't? How do I mitigate those things? How do I manage those things? How do I say no to the things that I don't want to do? And how do I say yes to the things that I do? And when we talk about psychology and spirituality and being in alignment and paying attention to those things, it's very easy to pay attention when you're out of alignment, when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling sad. That, to me, and that's not to say there aren't moments that you have those in life, But when it is longstanding or ongoing, which is really how we diagnose mental illness, is this a more acute experience or is this more chronic, right? Is this something that's really interfering with your functioning, or do you feel anxious, 1 day a week when you get up in the morning on Mondays? I do. I don't
Yeah.
think that's pathological. I think that's human. Um, but is it sustained over a period of time? And if so, you end up diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, but it really means you're out of alignment.
Yeah.
And so how do we get you back into alignment? And that might be a number of things, right? That might be medication, that might be meditation, that might be yoga, that might be therapy, that might be, I don't care how you get there. Might be acupuncture, might be massage, might be working out, might be going for walks, might be being with friends. Doesn't matter to me how you get there. It's just that you have a plan of getting there.
From a scientific standpoint, do you feel like, these patterns, as in being quarantined and stuff like that, that neurologically we've scientifically, chemically have been repatterned, and maybe the opening up may be more difficult to come back to
I
quote unquote
mean,
normal life?
I can't wait for 10 years from now to see the research on all of
I knew you were gonna say
this.
that. Give me that research.
I won't be doing it, but I'm curious to read about it.
Oh,
It can't not any experience. I mean, Dan Siegel, who does is it Dan Siegel? I always get his name wrong. Yes, Dan Siegel. I sometimes say Daniel Stern, who does a lot of work out of UCLA on he wrote The Whole Brain Child,
yep.
Parenting from the Inside Out. I mean, he's written lots of books, and he talks a lot about neuroplasticity, right? Which is a new concept that our brains, they used to think our brains were pretty set in terms of their wiring, and we now know that they're not, that you can change the neuronal firings in your brain, you can change the neuronal pathways in your brain, you can repattern your brain. And so how could this not have affected all of us, right? A
Right.
trauma at some level. This has
Yeah.
been traumatic for everybody. We don't know what that means. We don't know what that looks like from person to person. This is why I don't love diagnoses, because it's a really great way to understand someone from a list perspective. Here's, 12 things, and are they exhibiting these things? And it's a way to communicate between clinicians. It's not really a way to understand a person,
Yeah.
because we each have our own individual experiences that contributed to that, and how that manifests, how COVID is going to manifest in each one of our lives is going to look different.
Yeah.
There might be some similarities, there will be some threads throughout, but if you lost a loved one during COVID, you're going to have a different experience than someone who didn't lose a loved one during COVID. If you were, ended up without a job, or, long haulers, or whatever it is, any of these things are going to impact our brain. We
Yep.
just don't know what it's going to look like yet.
I'm with you on that. I just cannot wait to see. I, I can wait, but I also cannot wait to see what starts coming out of this, science wise, statistics wise, the research wise, and then what they're seeing. Like, just say this: in schools, how grocery stores function, transportation, like vacationing. It sounds so big and wide, but it's going to affect all that. I would
Mm-hmm.
assume.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. I mean, I was at the grocery store this morning, and things are definitely getting back to normal
Hmm.
pretty
But
quickly.
what do you feel like though? There's like this shift back to normal, but we're not going to be able to go back to February 2020. Like,
I
it's,
hope we can't. I hope we don't.
yeah, well, yeah. And like, it'll
Because I
start
think
off seeming normal, and like, I'm back to getting normal. And then, then like there's a hard left or something. I don't know.
we'll see.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of this that isn't worth going back to,
No.
but I think we probably will.
Yeah. We'll see. One last question.
Yes.
And what, how, What do you see going forward with your own podcast with all this? Like, I know you're so explorative and learning. What things would you like to like dive into in your own podcast? Because I find your topics fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah, I care very deeply about what I'm putting out there. I really am trying to get some quantum physicists on the show because I really want to understand things from a quantum perspective. I just, it's exciting about, some of what I shared earlier, like the research, the psychiatrist at Yale that's doing research on kids or people and how they're able to manage those experiences and voices and turn them on and turn them off. I love that people are really digging into this and they're thinking about it. Certainly, obviously, there's a huge shift right now in the field of psychology and psychiatry around psychedelics and how those are helping treat people. I'm not necessarily as interested in exploring those on our show because I think there's a ton of people talking about this right now, and I try to talk about some more obscure stuff.
Yeah.
I think also just remote viewing, I'm curious about out of body experiences. I'm curious about, how people are kind of controlling their minds in those types of ways. There's a lot that I'm wanting to explore, and sort of the opposite of you, we were talking before. I will explore with people who have reached out and who have um, I work with a lot of book publishers and things along those lines. So I get people who come to me in that way. But then the people that I want to reach out to seem to get bumped down the list. And so it's trying to find this balance of like, how do I reach out to the people I want to
Mm-hmm.
and also have some of these other great guests? Because I would have never come across many of these people without having some of these connections that I've cultivated over the past couple years. And it's really fun. I'm interviewing on Thursday. I have to finish her book. Jill Bolte Taylor, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. I don't know if you remember her
No.
story. She has a TED Talk it's one of the top 10 TED Talks ever, which basically means she's a little bit behind Brene Brown, right? Everybody knows Brene Brown's
I'm
TED
all
Talk.
in for a TED Talk. I'm all in.
And she had a stroke. She was a neuropsychologist, a neuroscientist investigating schizophrenia. She had a stroke, and she talks about her experience in her first. I think she had her first book was called A Stroke of Insight, and in that book she talks about the experience of basically watching her left brain shut down, and what that did to her right brain. And so there's so many amazing people out there who are doing research. I am not. I'm just bringing these people to the I'm just giving them a platform to speak. But I said to the Yale psychiatrist the other day, I'm like, God, I missed my calling here. Like I should have, if I had been in school now, these would have been the things that I would be pursuing.
Yeah, but isn't it? I feel so much gratitude for you know to have this space to do that because yes, these are the conversations I want to have, but like I get to feel like granted because you're such you are so like education and science, I could see how you would want to go deeper. For me, it'd be like, I want to go deep and I'll go deep for like 3 weeks and you'll see like a stack of books this high next to my bed about quantum physics. But then like the next week, I'm into something completely else. So, but this podcast gives us a space to like make those connections, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're interviewing her, like the pattern, even to see the pattern, right? And to explore that, as in, she was doing research on brain neuroplasticity, and then she has a stroke.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't tell me that her level of knowledge now has not gone off the.
Right. Well, and it's similar to Dr. Eben Alexander, who if people have heard or read, he was also, what was he, a neurosurgeon? I think he was a neurosurgeon at Harvard or MIT. And he had a near death experience. And he's teaching now people to be, I mean, I think his second book was Living in a Mindful Universe.
Yeah.
So he's totally shifted his entire life's work to be around helping people open up more.
Yep.
And that's a meaningful, I mean, it was a meaningful life when you were doing brain surgery, but I'm all about how to help people create meaningful lives for themselves.
Yeah.
And that might not be exploring, you know, the neuroplasticity of the brain, but whatever it is for you, that wherever you find meaning, that's what matters. Wherever
Yeah.
you find, I use the word essence a lot, wherever you can tap into that essence, the sense of who you are, that's where magic happens.
Yeah. Yep. Because that's where you can make the connections within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the language in which your body and soul and mind all speak.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
like I think you're right. I forget. But like, it's like little things like, how writers always have an obsession with stationery. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like little as that.
I
Like,
like pens, but I'm not
and
really a huge writer. I'm a better speaker than I am writer.
but even that, like, we created these podcasts because we're love to learn and love to communicate and love to explore. I I just want to explore, all these different people and how they navigate the world. Like right now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like I've been listening to drag queens interview porn stars, and
Oh my gosh.
it's people are like, "Good Lord," but it's because there's a bridge. They can bridge where somebody who isn't part of that porn world at all can talk about it, and how these people's lives are affected, and how that affects intimacy and connecting with other
Mm,
people and their boundaries. And that's not my world at all, but goodness, I like want to learn about it.
yeah.
So
Well, and everybody has a story, and
yes.
everybody has their experience that they're coming into the world with. And that to me is fascinating. I had a girls' weekend this weekend, and we did a wine tasting, and we were talking somehow to the guy who was serving the wine. Maybe he was a sommelier, but I'm not even going to go that far. And we were asking him how he got involved in what he was doing. And he said, well, he was working at the steel mills in Gary, Indiana. This was in Michigan. So he was working at the steel mills in Gary, Indiana, and he was working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And his grandma got sick, and he was trying to help take care of her while he was working. And he was working, 7 to 7, and then would go care for his grandma. He would drive her around. He would take her to her appointments. He would take off work. And in between all of that, working, working, working. And his grandpa worked at the steel mill, and his dad worked at the steel mill. And it was just what he needed to do. And his grandma on her deathbed said to him, this isn't really what you need to do. You find what brings you joy, and you do that. And so he left that and started, and he loves wine, and he loves beers, and he loves making those, and he started working at a winery, and he bought a house on the beach. Those were the two things. And he said, I'm so happy.
Yeah. It's not much. It's not
Mm-mm.
much, people.
And the amazing part is he listened, right? Like he could have kept the grind of working at the steel mill for the rest of his life, but he
Yep.
didn't. He listened. And on her deathbed, which I think is obviously is so powerful, because it just fit into
Yeah.
my whole spiel. What
She
did the
had the
dying have
clarity.
to teach us about how to live?
Yeah. Well, and at least, right, at least he listened.
Mm-hmm.
At least he listened.
So when we talk about
No, go ahead, go for it.
intuition or connecting or spirits guiding us, it can come in all kinds of ways. It can come through people. It's
Yes.
not necessarily you sitting in a meditation hearing things. It can come through a conversation with a friend about something you were thinking about. But if you're not listening and you're not paying attention, you're not going to be able to hear
Mm-mm. You're not going to be able to feel it ring inside of you.
it.
Like,
Mm-mm.
you're not. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where can
Thank you, Tara.
I'm just so happy that you came, because your podcast it lights up little things in my brain that, like, just you can feel somebody expanding your own mind, and that just, I love that.
I appreciate that, because as you know, sometimes you put a podcast out there and it's like, does it just fall into the abyss somewhere?
Yeah, you're right. I think that, but then like 8 months come later, and then I get like people calling me and be like, I just want you to know my mother-in-law called me about your podcast. Or then they'll be like, my cousin in Africa somehow stumbled upon your podcast.
Right.
Or, and
I'm always curious how people stumble upon it, right?
I know I had a huge following in New Zealand and like Africa for the longest time.
Huh.
And I just, that's how it actually started. And I'm like, I don't, how? But how do my guests find you? Where can they find you?
Sure. So my podcast is called Life, Death, and the Space Between. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts. My website's dramyrobbins.com, and my Instagram is at Dr. Amy Robbins. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm not on Facebook. So if you try to contact me there, you will think I'm very rude because I don't respond for like months. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I should check my Facebook Messenger. And there's like messages, and I'm
It's not
so
just you, it's me too, because I don't know how to use that like the platform, and things get lost.
yeah, it's just too overwhelming. There's too many buttons. It's too messy for me. It's just not my thing. I need
Yeah.
something cleaner, neater, easier,
More user friendly.
more user friendly. So you can find me on Instagram, and there I do respond.
Thank you so much. And I highly recommend others going and looking at her podcast.
Thank
Have
you
a
so much for having me.
anytime. Have a nice summer.
Thank you. You too.